Fix my Porsche and I'll marry you, the CEO mocked. Then the single dad lifted the hood. Hello, everyone, and welcome. Before we begin today's unforgettable story, where are you watching from? Let us know your city or country in the comments below. We love seeing viewers from all around the world. And if you believe in dignity, second chances, and the quiet power of kindness, please take a moment to subscribe to the channel and turn on the notification bell so you never miss a new story. Your support means everything to us and helps us continue creating heartfelt, unforgettable stories like this one. Thank you so much for being here. Now, without further ado, let's return to our main character and begin today's story. The strongest engines are not always hidden beneath carbon fiber and polished steel. Sometimes they are hidden inside ordinary people the world has already decided to overlook. The crowd gathered outside Sinclair Automotive's flagship innovation center shimmered beneath the bright California sun, where dozens of luxury cars reflected streaks of silver across the glass facade. Television crews adjusted their cameras while social media influencers pointed their phones toward the center display, a flawless silver Porsche 911 Turbo that had stubbornly refused to start despite weeks of inspections by certified specialists. Victoria Sinclair stood beside it with effortless confidence. At 35, the celebrated CEO had built her reputation on impossible victories, fearless decisions, and a personality sharp enough to command every room she entered. Wearing an elegant white blazer over a charcoal business suit, she smiled as photographers captured every angle. "Anyone who can fix my Porsche today," she announced with playful confidence, lifting her sunglasses onto her head, "I'll marry him." Laughter swept through the audience. Executives chuckled politely. Mechanics exchanged amused glances. Even the television host laughed into his microphone, assuming it was another clever publicity stunt designed to promote the company's latest technology summit. One after another, experienced technicians stepped forward. Expensive diagnostic tablets flashed. Across glowing screens, specialized scanners connected to the vehicle's computer. The Porsche remained silent. The atmosphere slowly shifted from playful confidence to quiet embarrassment. Victoria folded her arms, disguising frustration behind a practiced smile. Somewhere near the back of the crowd, a weathered blue pickup truck rolled into the parking lot with a soft growl. It looked completely out of place among the luxury sedans and imported sports cars. The driver climbed out wearing faded jeans, worn work boots, and a navy work shirt stained with grease that no amount of detergent could completely erase. Caleb Walker locked the truck, reached into the passenger seat, and smiled warmly at the little girl waiting inside. "I'll only be a few minutes, sweetheart," he said gently. His 10-year-old daughter Lily looked up from the library book resting on her lap and nodded. "Take your time, Dad. I'll keep reading." Caleb smiled, closed the truck door quietly, and walked toward the gathering without any hurry. He had not come to impress anyone. He had only delivered replacement parts to a nearby repair shop before noticing the unusual crowd. As he approached, he heard Victoria's voice once more. "Does anyone else want to try?" she asked, raising one eyebrow with a mixture of confidence and impatience. Several people stepped back. Nobody moved forward. Caleb studied the Porsche from several yards away. His eyes lingered for only a few seconds before something almost invisible caught his attention. He tilted his head slightly. Then he walked closer. A young executive looked him up and down before whispering loudly enough for others to hear. "Looks like the janitor wants a shot." More laughter followed. Victoria turned toward the grease-covered stranger, barely hiding an amused smile. "Well," she said lightly, "if you fix my Porsche, I guess I'll have to keep my promise." Caleb never laughed. He never looked offended. He simply met her eyes with quiet calm, reached for the hood latch, and slowly lifted it open. The moment the sunlight touched the engine bay, the warmth disappeared from his expression. Something inside that Porsche was terribly wrong. Caleb remained perfectly still as the conversations around him faded into a distant murmur. His eyes moved slowly across the engine compartment, never rushing, never reaching for a tool. Instead, he observed the tiny details that machines revealed only to people patient enough to listen. The polished aluminum intake manifold reflected the afternoon sunlight. Every factory seal appeared untouched. Every electrical connector looked clean. It was almost too perfect. Victoria crossed her arms and watched him with growing curiosity. "Well?" she asked after several long seconds. "Is it bad?" Caleb did not answer immediately. He leaned closer, placed 2 fingers gently against a fuel line, then rested his palm lightly on the edge of the engine bay, as if greeting an old friend. Finally, he spoke in a calm voice that barely rose above the breeze. "Who serviced this car last?" One of the senior technicians stepped forward. "Porsche certified dealership in Beverly Hills. 3 inspections. 2 master mechanics. They found nothing." Caleb nodded slowly. "I believe them." The technician frowned. "Then what are you looking for?" Caleb smiled faintly without taking his eyes off the engine. "Something they were never told to look for." The words settled over the crowd with unexpected weight. Several executives exchanged puzzled glances while camera operators quietly zoomed closer. Victoria stepped nearer until she stood beside him. For the first time since the event had begun, her confident smile softened into genuine interest. "Can you explain that?" she asked. Caleb pointed toward a small bracket hidden deep behind the intake assembly. "See that mounting bolt?" Victoria leaned closer, but shook her head. "It looks normal." "Exactly," Caleb replied. "It looks normal." He borrowed a flashlight from one of the mechanics and directed its narrow beam toward the hidden corner of the engine bay. Tiny scratches circled the bolt head in nearly invisible rings. "Factory bolts do not wear like this unless someone removes them more than once." The technician folded his arms. "That could happen during maintenance." Caleb nodded. "It could." He paused. "But not with fresh paint still trapped." Beneath the washer, silence spread through the gathering. One by one, people leaned closer. Even those who knew very little about engines sensed that something unusual had just been discovered. Caleb reached into his pocket and produced a simple folding inspection mirror that looked decades old. It was scratched, inexpensive, and nothing like the sophisticated electronic equipment scattered across the display tables. He angled the mirror beneath a cluster of wiring harnesses. After only a moment, he quietly exhaled. Victoria noticed the change in his expression. "What did you find?" Caleb straightened slowly. "Someone replaced one sensor." The senior technician laughed nervously. "That cannot stop an engine like this." Caleb looked at him kindly instead of arguing. "No, the replacement itself is not the problem." He pointed deeper inside the engine compartment. "The problem is why it was replaced." Victoria felt an unfamiliar chill despite the warm California afternoon. Her heartbeat slowed as questions multiplied inside her mind. "You think this was intentional?" Caleb finally looked directly at her. His steady blue eyes carried neither accusation nor drama, only quiet certainty earned through years of experience. "I do not think," he said softly. "I know." The laughter that had welcomed him only minutes earlier had completely disappeared. Phones lowered. Reporters stopped whispering. Somewhere behind the crowd, Lily looked up from her book through the windshield of the old pickup truck. She smiled proudly because she had seen that look on her father's face before. It was the same calm laugh now. Nobody whispered. Even the camera crews had forgotten to comment. They simply watched. Caleb carefully lifted a compact electronic sensor from its bracket and turned it toward the sunlight. "This is not the original part," he said quietly. One engineer stepped closer, adjusting his glasses. "It has the correct serial number." Caleb nodded. "The serial number is correct." He rotated the sensor another few degrees. "The manufacturing stamp is not." Victoria leaned beside him, her confidence replaced by concentration. "What does that mean?" Caleb pointed toward an almost invisible engraving near one corner. "This component was manufactured 8 months after this Porsche left the factory." One executive frowned. "Replacement parts happen all the time." "Yes," Caleb replied calmly. "Honest replacements do." He looked toward the engine once more. "But honest replacements leave honest records." A young mechanic quickly opened the vehicle's digital maintenance history on a tablet. His fingers moved rapidly across the screen before slowing to a stop. His face turned pale. "There is nothing here," he whispered. "No replacement was ever documented." Victoria reached for the tablet herself, reading every entry with increasing disbelief. Oil changes, tire rotations, brake inspections, software updates. Nothing mentioned the sensor now resting in Caleb's hand. The silence deepened. Caleb reached into the engine compartment again and gently separated a protective wiring sleeve. Tucked beneath it, almost impossible to notice without removing several components, was a tiny aftermarket connector no larger than a postage stamp. It blended perfectly with the factory wiring. "There," Caleb said softly. That is why every computer reported different problems. The lead engineer stared at the connector. That should not exist. Caleb smiled gently. Exactly. Carefully disconnecting the small device, he held it in his palm for everyone to see. It looked harmless, almost insignificant. Victoria looked from the connector to Caleb, searching for an explanation. What is it? She asked. A signal manipulator, Caleb answered. It sends false information to every diagnostic system connected to the vehicle. Every mechanic trusted the computer. None of them questioned the conversation the car was having with the scanner. One reporter lowered his microphone. Someone wanted this car to stay broken? Caleb met his eyes. Someone wanted everyone to believe it could not be fixed. The words settled over the crowd like a slow-moving storm. The breeze carried the scent of fresh coffee from the nearby cafe, yet nobody seemed aware of anything except the quiet man standing beside the Porsche. Caleb reconnected the original sensor, secured the wiring exactly as it had left the factory, and tightened the final bolt with measured precision. He closed the hood gently, never slamming it. Then he stepped toward the driver's door and looked at Victoria. Would you like to do the honors? She swallowed softly before accepting the key. For the first time all afternoon, her hands hesitated. She climbed into the driver's seat, pressed the brake pedal, and pushed the start button. The engine awakened instantly with a smooth, confident rumble that rolled across the plaza like a deep breath finally released. Heads turned. A few people gasped. Others simply stood frozen. The Porsche settled into a flawless idle as though nothing had ever been wrong. Victoria rested both hands on the steering wheel, unable to speak. Through the windshield, she looked at Caleb, who was already wiping his hands with an old shop towel before quietly returning the borrowed wrench to its owner. He asked for no applause, accepted no praise, and never once looked toward the cameras. In that moment, Victoria realized the rarest thing she had witnessed that day was not extraordinary mechanical skill. It was a man whose dignity had never depended on whether anyone believed in him. For several long seconds, nobody moved. The steady rhythm of the Porsche engine filled the open plaza like quiet proof that truth did not need to raise its voice. Then applause began from somewhere near the back of the crowd. One pair of hands became several. Within moments, the entire audience erupted into cheers, yet Caleb reacted as though he had heard nothing at all. He simply folded the old shop towel, slipped it into his back pocket, and glanced toward the blue pickup where Lily was still reading peacefully through the windshield. Victoria stepped out of the Porsche with a different expression than the one she had worn only minutes earlier. The playful confidence that had once hidden behind expensive sunglasses had been replaced by sincere curiosity. She walked toward Caleb without cameras directing her or public relations advisors whispering in her ear. "Mr. Walker," she said carefully after reading the delivery receipt sticking out of the pocket on his work shirt. "Would you consider coming inside for a few minutes?" Caleb looked toward his truck before answering. "I appreciate the invitation, but my daughter has been waiting. I promised I would not keep her long." Victoria followed his gaze and noticed Lily smiling while turning another page of her book. The sight surprised her more than the repaired Porsche. Most people would have stayed to enjoy the attention. Caleb seemed ready to leave before anyone even finished applauding. "It will only take a moment," Victoria said gently. "I would like to thank you properly." Caleb offered a polite smile. "You already did." She looked confused. "I did. You believed what I showed you instead of arguing with it." His answer lingered between them. It was simple, respectful, and impossible to dismiss. One of the board members hurried over carrying a leather portfolio. "Miss Sinclair," he whispered excitedly. "We should offer him a consulting contract immediately. Someone with his knowledge could be invaluable." Another executive quickly added, "Name the price. We can work out the details this afternoon." Victoria nodded before turning back to Caleb. "Would you consider joining Sinclair Automotive? Even as an independent consultant? We would compensate you very well." Caleb listened without interrupting. When she finished, he shook his head almost apologetically. "That is generous, but I cannot today." Several executives exchanged puzzled looks. One of them laughed softly, convinced the offer simply was not large enough. "You have not even heard the number." Caleb smiled kindly. "The number is not the problem." He checked the time on the old watch wrapped around his wrist. "My daughter's science fair starts in less than 90 minutes. She has been working on her project for 3 weeks. I promised I would be there before the judges arrived." Victoria blinked. You are turning down a career opportunity because of a school event? Caleb answered without hesitation. There will always be another meeting. My daughter only gets one fourth-grade science fair. The words settled over everyone standing nearby. No presentation slide, no motivational speech, and no business strategy had ever silenced the boardroom leaders the way that quiet sentence did. Victoria found herself smiling without realizing it. It was not admiration for his mechanical talent anymore. It was respect for the priorities that guided his life. Caleb walked back to the pickup, opened the passenger door, and Lily looked up with bright eyes. "Did you fix it, Dad?" she asked. He chuckled softly. It just needed someone willing to listen. Lily closed her book and climbed out long enough to wave politely toward Victoria. Victoria returned the wave with an unexpected warmth. As the old pickup disappeared into afternoon traffic beside rows of luxury vehicles, she remained standing in the parking lot, watching until it vanished from sight. For reasons she could not yet explain, the richest person in the plaza had just driven away in the oldest truck, and somehow everyone else suddenly felt as though they had been the ones chasing something far less valuable. 3 days passed, yet Caleb Walker never called Sinclair Automotive, never sent an invoice, and never mentioned the incident to anyone. His mornings still began before sunrise inside his modest repair garage on the edge of town, where the scent of motor oil blended with fresh coffee and old country music drifted softly from a small radio perched above a tool cabinet. Customers came not because the building looked impressive, but because honest work had a way of earning quiet loyalty. Caleb greeted every driver with the same calm smile, whether they arrived in an aging family sedan or an expensive sports car. Between repairs, he helped Lily review multiplication tables, listened to her practice reading aloud, and somehow made every ordinary moment feel important. Across the city, Victoria Sinclair found herself distracted in ways she had never experienced before. During executive meetings, her thoughts drifted back to the man who had walked away from an opportunity that countless engineers would have considered life-changing. She had negotiated billion-dollar contracts without hesitation, yet she could not understand why one father would choose a fourth-grade science fair over a prestigious consulting position. The question stayed with her long after each meeting ended. Late one Friday afternoon, curiosity finally overcame routine. Without informing her assistants or security team, Victoria climbed into a simple rental SUV instead of one of her company vehicles and drove across town using the address printed on the delivery receipt she had quietly kept. The navigation led her away from polished office towers and luxury shopping districts until she reached a quiet neighborhood where small family businesses lined both sides of the street. Caleb's garage stood on the corner with faded blue paint, neatly swept concrete floors, and flower boxes beneath the front windows that someone clearly cared enough to water every morning. Victoria parked across the street, deciding not to interrupt immediately. Through the open garage door, she watched Caleb kneeling beside an elderly woman's station wagon. "Try it now, Mrs. Henderson," he called with an encouraging smile. The woman turned the key, and the engine started smoothly. Relief filled her face. "How much do I owe you?" she asked while reaching for her purse. Caleb wiped his hands with the same old shop towel. The loose battery cable only needed tightening. "There is no charge today." The woman looked surprised. "Are you sure?" Caleb nodded. "Save your money for your granddaughter's birthday this weekend. You told me she turns 8 tomorrow." Mrs. Henderson's eyes became misty. "You remembered. Some things matter more than invoices," Caleb replied. She thanked him warmly before driving away. Victoria watched in silence. Minutes later, a young delivery driver arrived looking anxious about an aging work van. Caleb inspected it carefully before saying, "The repair can wait another week without hurting the engine. Keep making your deliveries first. We will take care of it next Friday after payday." The relieved driver smiled with gratitude before leaving. Nobody had asked Caleb to be generous. Nobody was recording videos or taking photographs. He acted the same way when nobody important appeared to be watching. Just then Lily skipped out of a small office carrying 2 paper cups of lemonade. She handed one to her father before noticing the unfamiliar woman standing near the sidewalk. With cheerful confidence, she waved. "Hi there." Victoria smiled back and walked over. "Hello. Your father seems very busy." Lily grinned proudly. "He always is. People say he fixes cars, but I think he mostly fixes bad days." Victoria looked through the open garage door at Caleb, who was helping another customer without realizing she had arrived. For the first time in many years, she understood that success could be measured by something no financial statement had ever been able to calculate, and the quiet richness of that little garage suddenly felt greater than the tallest office in her company. Victoria remained on the sidewalk for another minute before finally stepping inside the garage. A small brass bell above the entrance chimed softly, and Caleb looked up from the pickup truck he was servicing. There was no surprise on his face, only the same calm expression he seemed to offer every customer who walked through his door. "Good afternoon," he said warmly. "How can I help you today?" Victoria smiled. "I do not think I came here because of my car." Caleb wiped his hands on the familiar shop towel before offering one of the two wooden chairs beside an old coffee table. "Then perhaps you came for the coffee. It is free, although I cannot promise it is very fancy." Lily giggled from the office doorway. "Dad always says the coffee is stronger than the engines." Victoria laughed, and for the first time in weeks the sound felt completely natural. She accepted the paper cup Caleb handed her and looked around the garage. Everything was spotless despite the years of use. Every wrench hung neatly on the wall. Every drawer carried handwritten labels. Family photographs occupied one corner beside Lily's school trophies and science fair ribbon. Nothing about the place suggested wealth, yet everything reflected care. After a moment, Victoria asked quietly, "Have you always owned this garage?" Caleb glanced around the room before answering. "Almost 8 years. And before that?" He hesitated just long enough for Lily to notice. She quietly returned to the office, sensing her father was about to tell a story he rarely shared. Caleb rested both hands on the workbench. "Before that, I worked for a performance engineering company. We designed high-efficiency powertrain systems for sports cars and prototype vehicles." Victoria blinked. "You were an engineer?" Caleb nodded gently. "Lead development engineer." She stared at him in disbelief. "That does not make sense. Someone with your experience could be running an international company." Caleb smiled, though there was a quiet sadness behind it. "Life does not always follow the map we draw." He looked toward the family photographs. "When Lily was 2 years old, my wife became seriously ill. By the time we understood how quickly everything was changing, my priorities had already changed with it." Victoria remained silent, allowing him to continue. "After she passed away, every business trip became one more day away from my daughter. Every promotion asked for more hours than I was willing to give. Eventually, I realized I could build remarkable machines or help one little girl rebuild her world. I could not do both." The words settled gently inside the quiet garage. Victoria lowered her eyes toward the coffee cup in her hands. She had spent years believing success required sacrificing everything else. Yet the man standing before her had sacrificed success itself to protect something even more valuable. At that moment, her phone began vibrating repeatedly. She glanced at the screen and immediately recognized the expressions forming on the faces of her executive team during the incoming video conference. The meeting connected, and anxious voices filled the speaker. "Miss Sinclair, we have a serious problem," one executive reported. "The prototype for the Phoenix electric performance platform failed its final validation tests again this morning. 3 engineering teams have reviewed it. Nobody can explain the system instability." Another executive added, "Investors arrive in 4 days. If we cannot solve this issue, the launch may have to be postponed." Victoria listened quietly before her eyes drifted back toward Caleb, who had already returned to tightening a wheel with the same steady patience he applied to every task. The contrast struck her immediately. Inside billion-dollar headquarters, panic spread from office to office. Inside a small neighborhood garage, one man quietly solved problems without raising his voice. She ended the call, took a slow breath, and looked at Caleb with growing conviction. "I know this is a great deal to ask," she said carefully, "but I believe my company needs someone who knows how to listen before trying to fix what everyone else keeps forcing." Caleb remained quiet for several moments after Victoria finished speaking. The soft ticking of the garage wall clock seemed louder than the traffic outside. He placed the wrench back on the workbench with the same care he gave every tool before looking toward Lily, who was now finishing her homework at the small desk in the office. "How long would you need me?" he asked. Victoria answered honestly. "One afternoon, perhaps a few hours. If you cannot solve it, I will still be grateful that you tried." Caleb smiled faintly. You are asking the wrong question. Victoria tilted her head. What should I be asking? Ask whether your engineers are willing to let someone challenge what they already believe. She thought about the tense conference call only moments earlier and slowly nodded. I will make sure they listen. The following morning, Caleb arrived at Sinclair Automotive in the same faded blue pickup truck. Security guards who had seen him during the Porsche demonstration welcomed him with respectful smiles instead of curious glances. Victoria met him personally in the lobby and led him through a series of spotless laboratories where dozens of engineers studied computer models displayed across enormous digital screens. Conversations gradually faded as people recognized the quiet mechanic from the recent event. Some looked intrigued. Others remained skeptical. Inside the main development center, a sleek silver prototype rested beneath bright lights, surrounded by laptops, testing equipment, and pages of technical reports. Victoria addressed the room calmly. This is Caleb Walker. I have asked him to evaluate the Phoenix platform with fresh eyes. A senior engineer forced a polite smile. We appreciate another opinion. Although I should mention that our team has already completed over 1,000 diagnostic simulations. Caleb nodded respectfully. I believe you. Without touching a keyboard, he slowly walked around the prototype. He paused near each wheel, crouched beside the battery enclosure, and rested one hand lightly against the body panel. The room watched in complete silence. Finally he asked, May I hear it? The engineers exchanged puzzled looks. It barely operates, one replied. That is enough, Caleb said gently. They powered the system. The electric motors hummed almost silently as data streamed across the monitors. Most people focused on the graphs filling their screens. Caleb closed his eyes instead. He listened. After less than 30 seconds, he asked them to stop the test. Run it again, he said. They repeated the sequence. Once again, Caleb listened without looking at the monitors. Victoria noticed that every engineer had stopped typing. Even the executives stood quietly behind the glass observation wall. When the second test ended, Caleb walked to one corner of the prototype and lightly tapped the composite frame with his knuckle. A dull vibration echoed back. He smiled almost imperceptibly. Your software is not failing, he said. Several engineers immediately objected. The error logs clearly show synchronization faults. Caleb nodded. The computers are reporting the symptom. He looked toward the battery housing beneath the floor. Not the cause. The room became perfectly still. Caleb borrowed a simple flashlight from a technician and examined a narrow mounting channel hidden beneath the rear suspension assembly. After only a few seconds, he pointed toward an almost invisible support bracket. That reinforcement plate is 3 millimeters out of specification. One engineer frowned. That is impossible. It passed manufacturing inspection. Caleb smiled kindly. The measurement passed. The material did not. He explained calmly that the bracket flexed slightly under load, creating tiny vibrations that confused one sensitive sensor, which then triggered false synchronization warnings throughout the control system. The computers had faithfully reported the incorrect information because they had never been programmed to question the physical structure beneath them. Silence filled the laboratory. Engineers stared first at Caleb, then at the prototype, then back at one another. Victoria slowly realized she was witnessing the same quiet miracle for the second time. While everyone else had been searching inside thousands of lines of software, the humble single father had simply listened until the machine told him the truth. The laboratory remained silent until one of the senior engineers slowly walked toward the support bracket with a precision measuring instrument. His hands trembled ever so slightly as he compared the manufacturing specifications with Caleb's observation. Nearly a minute passed before he finally looked up. He is right, the engineer said quietly. The alloy density is inconsistent. Under operating load, it flexes just enough to create harmonic interference. Another engineer immediately reran the structural simulation using the corrected material properties. This time, every warning disappeared from the display. Green confirmation indicators spread across every monitor in the room one after another. Someone whispered, "We spent 6 weeks searching for a software problem that never existed." Another simply leaned back in his chair, shaking his head with an expression that mixed disbelief with admiration. Victoria watched the room transform before her eyes. Pride gave way to humility. Frustration became relief. The same people who had quietly questioned Caleb's presence were now studying him with genuine respect. Yet Caleb accepted none of the attention for himself. He simply returned the borrowed flashlight to the technician and thanked him with a warm smile. "Good equipment," he said. "It helped." The technician laughed softly. "No, sir. You helped." Victoria stepped closer, her voice carrying none of the confidence that had once sounded so effortless. "You saved months of work," she said. "You probably saved the entire project." Caleb shook his head gently. "Your team built an excellent vehicle. They only trusted the computers more than the machine itself." He looked around the laboratory with kindness rather than criticism. "Technology is remarkable, but experience teaches us that every measurement should begin with listening." Those words settled over the engineers like an unexpected lesson that no university textbook had ever offered. A younger engineer approached Caleb, holding an old employee archive displayed on a tablet. "Excuse me," he asked carefully. "Were you the Caleb Walker who worked at Horizon Performance Engineering?" Caleb glanced at the photograph on the screen and smiled faintly. "That was a long time ago." The young engineer looked stunned. "Your hybrid cooling architecture is still discussed in graduate engineering courses. We studied one of your published design papers last semester." Conversations immediately spread throughout the room as more engineers searched the company archives. Within minutes, several recognized his name from patents, technical journals, and industry conferences dating back more than a decade. Victoria stood perfectly still. She had spent days wondering how an ordinary garage owner possessed such extraordinary instincts. Now the answer unfolded before her. He had never been ordinary. He had simply chosen a different definition of success. She slowly walked toward him, her eyes filled with quiet sincerity. "I owe you an apology," she said. Every conversation stopped. Every engineer turned toward the two of them. Victoria took a slow breath before continuing. "The first time we met, I saw grease on your hands before I saw wisdom in your heart. I judged your appearance before I understood your character. That was my mistake, and I am truly sorry." Caleb looked at her for a moment before offering the same peaceful smile that had never left him. "Engines do not care how expensive a suit is," he replied softly. "People should not either." A few engineers lowered their eyes, remembering the jokes they had made when he first entered the laboratory. No one defended those moments. No one tried to explain them away. Respect had replaced pride, and excuses no longer seemed necessary. Victoria extended her hand, not as a chief executive greeting a mechanic, but as one person honoring another. Caleb accepted it with quiet grace. There were no flashing cameras, no reporters waiting outside the laboratory, and no audience beyond the people who had witnessed the truth with their own eyes. Yet somehow that simple handshake carried more meaning than any awards ceremony either of them had ever attended, because genuine respect, once earned through humility and quiet dignity, never needed applause to be remembered. Autumn arrived quietly a few weeks later, painting the trees along the country roads with shades of gold and crimson. Life at Caleb's garage looked much the same as it always had. The same blue pickup rested in the parking lot each morning. The same brass bell welcomed every customer through the front door. The same old coffee pot filled the room with its familiar aroma before the first engine ever started. Success had found Caleb once again, yet it had not changed the man who greeted every stranger with kindness or every challenge with patience. Inside Sinclair Automotive, the Phoenix platform launched on schedule and quickly became the company's most successful engineering achievement. Investors praised the breakthrough. Industry magazines celebrated the innovation. During every interview, Victoria made certain that her engineers received the credit they deserved. But whenever reporters asked what had truly changed the project, she always smiled and answered the same way. "We finally learned to listen before we try to speak." One Saturday morning, a familiar silver Porsche rolled slowly into Caleb's garage. Lily looked up from arranging flower pots near the entrance and smiled as Victoria stepped out carrying a large picnic basket instead of business documents. She was dressed simply in jeans and a light blue sweater, looking far more comfortable than she ever had inside a boardroom. "Good morning," Lily called happily. "Did your car break again?" Victoria laughed. "No. This time I came because it works perfectly." Caleb emerged from beneath a customer's truck and smiled when he saw her. "Then I hope this is just a friendly visit." "It is," Victoria answered. "Although I did bring lunch, just in case you forgot to take a break again." Lily's eyes brightened immediately. "Dad always forgets." Caleb raised his hands with playful surrender, making both of them laugh. They spread lunch beneath the large oak tree beside the garage, while a gentle breeze carried fallen leaves across the pavement. There were no executives, no cameras, and no expectations. Only quiet conversation, homemade sandwiches, fresh lemonade, and the peaceful rhythm of ordinary life. After lunch, Victoria reached into the picnic basket and carefully removed a small framed photograph. It showed the day the Phoenix prototype had completed its first successful demonstration. Across the bottom of the frame was a simple engraved message. The greatest strength is quiet dignity. Caleb looked at the gift for a long moment before placing it inside the office beside Lily's science fair ribbon and family photographs. "Thank you," he said softly. Victoria smiled with gentle warmth before looking toward the silver Porsche parked beside the old blue pickup. "Do you remember something I said the first day we met?" Caleb chuckled. "I remember." She shook her head with an embarrassed smile. "I told you that if you fixed my Porsche, I would marry you." Lily looked back and forth between them with wide eyes before quietly grinning. Victoria laughed at herself. "At the time, I thought it was just a clever joke." She paused before continuing. "Today I know that promises are not measured by words spoken in public. They are measured by the respect we earn afterward." Caleb met her eyes with calm sincerity. Respect is a wonderful place to begin any friendship. Neither of them rushed the moment. Some stories do not need dramatic endings because the strongest relationships are built one quiet day at a time. As the afternoon sun settled behind the hills, Lily climbed into the back seat of the Porsche for a short ride down the peaceful country road, while Caleb sat beside Victoria, both smiling as laughter filled the car. There were no grand speeches and no fairy tale miracles, only second chances, humble hearts, and the quiet understanding that real wealth is never found in luxury, titles, or applause. It is found in the people who choose kindness when pride would be easier, who choose family when ambition demands more, and who remind the world that the finest engines are not built inside remarkable machines, but inside ordinary hearts that never stop choosing grace.